Okay, I want to welcome everyone. We are happy to have all of you here today for the Tree Canopy Ordinance Workshop. My name is Tracy Wiles. I am the Land Development Manager here at the City of Milton, and we're excited to have our second workshop of the year. We hosted a pool permit lunch and learn workshop back in June, and we thought it was pretty successful. And so our hope is that today's workshop is as equally informative and helpful for all of you. I guess the best thing that I like about the workshop is that we all get free lunch, right? So with that said, everyone's got a box lunch. Please feel free to leave during the presentation. The only thing we do ask is once you're finished, to collect your trash in the trash can in the back here corner. Bathrooms are out in the lobby on either side of the entrance chambers. If you haven't picked up an agenda presentation slide, please do so. There's areas for notes. We'll have a Q&A session. We want to welcome today all of our participants who are joining us via Zoom. And so if you're going through the runners for our Zoom participants, you will remain muted throughout the presentation, and you will also, video will be off through the presentation. There is a chat feature that will be monitored. If you have any questions, please enter your questions into the chat box, and we'll ask those questions at the end of the workshop. So with that being said, I want to introduce now our city arborist, Sandra DeWitt, and invite her to come up for today's presentation.
Does it sound good? Is it good if I, okay. All right, so we're still working out our sound with Zoom and everything. So I think everybody in the room can hear me fine, right? Okay, but I'll try to stay close to a microphone so people on Zoom can hear me. How about feeling good feedback now? Okay, so thank you for the welcome from Tracy. I'm glad everybody came out today. And this is kind of just hopefully to give you some information about the tree ordinance and help you understand when you're preparing plans or when you're working on new projects coming up in Milton. This will give you an idea of what to expect with the Tree Canopy Ordinance, which has recently been amended. But first of all, let's go over, I want to kind of give you an idea of what we'll be talking about today, go over the agenda. So we will be doing, I'll just kind of give you a brief history of the Milton Tree Ordinance. Keep it brief. Is it, they're saying on Zoom? Okay. Okay, so hopefully we'll get the sound figured out for Zoom. We'll also talk about what's new with the Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance and the amendments that were just passed. We'll be talking about a Tree Canopy Plan. Which Tree Canopy Plan is going to be what you're submitting. We're going to go over tree canopy cover requirements for those of you that have used the density ordinance in the past or even recently. This might be a little new for you, so I'm going to kind of go over tree canopy cover requirements and calculations. We'll talk about specimen and heritage trees. There were a few changes with the specimen and heritage trees as far as represents and credits and things like that you probably want to be aware of. We'll also talk about structural root plate because this is something new that was in the ordinance. It's not in the previous density ordinance or the previous tree canopy ordinance. So I just want to go over that real quick. And then we'll just kind of touch base a little bit on required tree locations. So when you're working on new development and new projects in Milton, there are some required tree locations that I just kind of want to briefly touch on so that you're aware of it and you're thinking about these things when you're working on new projects. Then we will have time for questions. If anybody has questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or ask or blurt it out, whatever, and I'll help you out throughout the presentation. But at the end, we'll have a time for you to answer any questions that you have at the end, and then we will adjourn. So let's start off with the tree ordinance and the history of the ordinance. I know some of you, like Scott, have been in Milton forever and are familiar with when the city first incorporated. They basically went with the Fulton County Tree Density Ordinance, tweaked it a little bit, made it a little more Milton-esque, and used the Tree Density Ordinance for a long time. In 2018, they actually went to a Tree Canopy Ordinance. They used the help of a consultant who came in and helped write the Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance, and it was adopted and passed in 2018. And this basically went from using the tree density, which is more basal area, kind of forestry applications, to doing canopy cover, which is kind of how we measure the benefits of trees, is from the canopy. So the canopy cover, the Canopy Conservation Ordinance kind of focuses more on tree canopy. For the past couple of years, staff has been working with Stakeholder Committee and Planning Commission on doing some amendments to the Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance. Kind of important to know that right now, there was some amendments passed to the new Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance in August. One of the amendments that passed is that you have the option of using the tree density original ordinance or the new Canopy Conservation Ordinance until November 30th. Starting December 1st, everyone will be using the Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance. So I just kind of picked the top 5 things that are new to the Canopy Conservation Ordinance. Most of the stuff that was done was language cleanup. We just tried to streamline everything, hopefully make it a little clearer and more understanding for everybody. We also looked at the protected tree size. When the first Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance was passed, it started at 6 inches. Basically, protected tree is the size where you start where you need permits. So protected tree is when you start having to have tree removal permit requirements. So that was changed from 6 inches to 15 inches, which if you worked under the density ordinance, that was pretty much the same in the density ordinance. It was 15 inches. So now anything less than 15 inches does not require a permit unless it's a specimen understory tree. But only trees 15 inches and greater are going to be where you start your permit requirements. We also tweaked the tree canopy coverage requirements, and we'll kind of get into more depth of that later. But some of those things we'll look at and change, and there's a whole table. And like I said, I'll go over that in more detail later. Specimen tree size and some of the replacement requirements for specimen trees were changed as well. And I'll give you the full breakdown of that as we get into it. And then, like I said, structural root plate, the new definition that was added, and we'll go into that. So now we're going to kind of talk about the tree canopy plan. The tree canopy plan, like I said, is what you're going to be submitting when you're doing development. So the ordinance is basically broken down into 2 major sections. Tree removal not associated with development, which is a homeowner who's just looking to remove some trees in their backyard for whatever reason. And then you have tree removal associated with development. So development activity is going to include building permit, land disturbance permit, pool permit, grading permit. Any of those permits we consider development activity, and that's when you may need to do a tree canopy plan. A tree canopy plan may not be required for every type of development permit or every development going on in Milton, such as if you were doing a pool in a backyard and you have a big open space with no trees, which I find a lot in Milton, and you're not doing any tree removal to build your pool, then obviously you're not going to need a tree canopy. But you will just need to note on your plan, no trees, no protected trees to be removed. Sometimes if you're doing that pool permit or even a shed in the backyard, and maybe you only have to take down 1 tree, and you can tell from the GIS and your site visit that it's not going to affect the overall tree canopy, and you can prove that, with just some simple documentation or notation, then you can do that. But if you ever submit something to me without a tree canopy plan, and I feel like it's a big enough project that we're going to need a tree canopy plan, then that may be a comment that you receive. So that will kind of be done on a case-by-case scenario. But if you do find yourself in need of a tree canopy plan, if you're working on a big subdivision development or any kind of commercial property or something, you're most likely going to need a tree canopy plan. And that should be prepared by a licensed professional, such as a certified arborist, registered forester, landscape architect, professional engineer, or registered land surveyor, or the like. It should be drawn to scale. Your tree canopy plan will include a tree survey, a tree protection plan, and a tree planting plan. Now, all three of these can be put on the same sheet as long as I can read it. And you can get it on there without it being too crowded. Sometimes people will put the tree survey and tree protection plan on one sheet and the tree replacement plan on another sheet. It just depends on the project, what type of scale you're using, that kind of thing. Okay, here is a brief summary of what the minimum requirements for tree canopy plan are going to be. So you'll need a table that summarizes the tree canopy coverage. So there's no particular format for the table. You can do it however you need to get the information on there. But basically just create a table that kind of tells what the required tree canopy coverage is, the existing that you have, any planting that you're doing, and add it all together to show how you meet the tree canopy coverage requirement. You'll also need to locate you'll need to show the trees that are individual protected trees. So that's where we get into the 15 inches or greater. So individual trees that are on their own, they do not have an overlapping canopy with any other trees in the area. They're just sitting out by themselves. Those will need to be located with their size and species. Any trees that are in groups or in forested areas where they have overlapping canopies, you can show that as one big location. So you would kind of just show or survey the tree canopy line and calculate the area of the forested trees. You also need to show the critical root zone and structural root plate of protected trees conserved that may be having encroachment into their critical root zone or their structural root plate. If you have a tree way back in the wooded area that you're not getting anywhere near, I don't need to see the critical root zone and structural root plate of those. It's just the trees that you're getting close to and you're encroaching into the critical root zone. All protected trees proposed to be removed. Go ahead and show me what you're going to be removing for the project. If it is in a forested area, you can just delineate your area of clearing and give me a description of what's in the area by size and species. In DEA training, give me a range of tree species. You'll need to show your tree safe areas with details. And by details, I mean like your installation details. Are you using the orange fence with the signage every 50 feet? Are you using chain link fence? Are you using just whatever your detail is that you're putting out to show where your tree safe areas are? You'll need to show all existing and proposed improvements on the area, such as your new house, your new driveway, utilities, things like that. And show your access to the areas. How are you getting back there? Are you going to be driving through trees to get to the area where you're doing your improvement? I mean, typically, you have to show a construction exit anyway on your plan, so that would just be included on that. And then we also want to see your proposed grading and your limits of disturbance. By seeing your grading and your limits of disturbance, we'll know if you're getting into a critical root zone of any specimen or protected tree. Okay, so before I move on, does anybody have questions about tree canopy plans?
Who can do a tree survey? You said the canopy plan can be any tree survey.
Yeah, would be the
state laws that on the surveyors can show dimension drawings. So who's gonna go out and,
Well,
locate those trees?
so if you are showing the exact locations by survey, then it would be done by a surveyor. Sometimes arborists will go out and just do it by triangulation or measuring. So the tree survey can be done by any of those professionals listed. But I know you're talking about like a true survey.
I'm talking about, yeah, I mean, no one's supposed to show dimensions to any property lines or any location of anything if you're not a registered one.
Well, right, but the tree survey would just be showing the locations of the trees. So they may take an existing survey, or the surveyor may do the survey for them and locate the trees, and then the arborist will go out and identify them and measure them.
So in other words, approximate location of trees.
Right.
The surveyor also went to the distinction between the specimens and the non-specimen species.
As long as they can measure them. Are you talking about as far as health? No, in that case, you are going to need an arborist to do that. It would either need to be a certified arborist that you hire, or the determination would be made by the city arborist at the time of review. Well, he's talking about health, yeah. I thought you were talking about size at first, sorry. But yeah, as far as determining the health of the tree, or the vigor of the tree, or the overall structural condition of the tree, that would need to be done by an arborist.
Details? Tree growth.
Mm-hmm.
Will have sort of a details, high-level details, or whatever source?
Well, we do have an example of a tree state detail in the tree conservation manual. So the tree conservation manual adopted at the same time as the ordinance. But that is not like a standard detail you have to use necessarily. It's a recommended detail. So whatever detail you want to use, I mean, if I don't feel it's adequate, I may comment on it and ask you to do something else. But as long as I feel like it's going to be adequate for the job and for the development occurring, then it'll become whatever detail you want to use. You just need to provide the detail and let me know what you're going to do for the tree site.
If you have a subdivision, you do a full tree canopy plan, you then also have to do individual plans for lots as you build them along.
Yes. Yeah, so the tree canopy cover requirements are for the entire subdivision development and then each individual lot.
How much do you encroach into critical root zone or structural plant?
Okay, well, the critical root zone is going to be 25%. So once you exceed 25%, it will not be considered a conserved tree. So you cannot count it towards your canopy coverage. For the structural root plate, there's no encroachment into the structural root plate. Any encroachment to the structural root plate will not count as a conserved tree and will not count towards your canopy coverage. All right. So we're going to move on to canopy coverage requirements. This may answer some questions you haven't thought about yet. So the canopy coverage requirements are going to be what is currently existing on the site, or the minimum canopy coverage set forth in the table in the ordinance, which I will show you that in a second, whichever is less. So if you go out to a site and say the table says that your minimum canopy coverage requirement is 25% based on your zoning and the size of the lot, if that site only has 20% existing, then your required canopy coverage is going to be 20%. So if you're already below the minimum requirement, you're allowed to keep that. You don't have to bring it up to the minimum requirement, but you can't go any lower. The canopy coverage requirement can be met with existing trees or a combination of existing trees and new planted trees. The existing trees on a site must make up 1/3 of the required canopy coverage. So if your canopy coverage requirement on your site is 30%, 10% of that should be existing trees to remain on the site that you conserve. So here is the table that I'm talking about. You'll find this in the tree ordinance. So you can see that over on the left is the zoning district, and it also includes some of the lot sizes for some zoning districts. And then on the right is the minimum canopy coverage requirement. So you see we have a range from 10% to 57%, but nothing's higher than 57%. And 57, I know, is a strange number. Long story. So basically we got there because when a canopy coverage study of the whole entire city was done, it was determined that our canopy coverage was at 57%. So in keeping with the goal of the ordinance to have a no net loss tree canopy, that's why top tree canopy coverage requirement is 57%. So but you see on some of them, like your T5, T6 is 10% because those are a higher density period. So when you're working on a project, you'll just have to look at this table, figure out what your zoning is, and for the AG1, you'll see it's kind of in green here. You have your lots that are up to 1.49 acres, and then you have your lots from 1.5 to 2.99 acres, and those over 3 acres. So those fluctuate based on the size of your lot. So then we have how you measure your canopy. So there's a couple of different methods for this. So you can use the actual measured canopy cover, which would be go out for those individual trees that you have sitting by themselves in the lot. You can go out and you can measure canopy coverage by taking the diameter of the widest point of the canopy and then taking another diameter perpendicular to that. Basically finding the average of those two and use that as your diameter for your circle. We're thinking of the canopy as a circle, basically. So you take that average, and then that gives you your diameter, and you divide that in half to get your radius. All coming back to everybody from high school. So if you remember, area of the circle is pi r squared. So once you get your radius, you can determine the area of your canopy. Or you can use the standard tree canopy cover credit, which is assigned using this is the table that I got from the Tree Conservation Manual. To see a very wide tree, maybe like your oaks, your hickories, things like that, are going to give you 1,600 square feet credit. Your wide trees, which are more like your maples, things like that, are going to give you 900 square feet credit. And your narrow canopy is going to give you 400 square feet. Those are like your dogwoods, redbuds, things like that. And then your narrow canopy is going to give you 150 square feet credit. Think arborvitae, things like that.
Is there a chart that is species specific on that?
Yeah, so we have a tree species list that is an appendix of the Tree Conservation Manual.
It gives it, it's wide, very wide.
Yeah, so it has a column that tells you if it's wide, very wide, and then it also has a column that tells you what's present.
You're talking about replacement credit?
Either, so this is replacement credit, this will give you your replacement credit, or you can use it as your standard credit link for existing trees. So you can use either one. So like if you go out and measure, so if you have a large tree, like a 30-inch tree, you may find that it has more than 1,600 square feet of canopy. So in that case, you may want to measure it because you're going to get a little more credit for it. But if you go out and you have a tree that is 16 inches, it's probably not quite 1,600 square feet yet, but it's probably getting a little closer. But you can give it the 1,600 square feet of credit. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to use. A lot of people, to make it easier, they'll just go ahead and use the standard. canopy credit, because then you can just look up by species. You can say this is an oak at 1600, this is a hickory at 1600, here's a maple at 900. Or you can go out and measure it.
When you reach the requirement, when you plan to do a record test, can you use that value as well at your search stage?
Yes. Yes, for all newly planted trees, you're going to use the standard tree canopy cover credit. So we're basically giving you credit for your future tree. So, and how you calculate your canopy cover percent. I think everybody watched their high school math again, and you know how to figure out percentage, but you're basically going to take your existing canopy coverage and your planted canopy coverage, total that, and then divide by the total square footage of your lot or your property. And then you're going to multiply by 100 to get the percent. Pretty standard math there. Here's kind of an example. So I know this is probably real hard for everybody to see. This is as big as I can make it, sorry. So here we have an AG1 lot that's 1 acre. And you can see we have our improved area. It looks like they're building a house and a nice deck and a driveway. So in the upper right-hand corner, that's a forested or wooded area. So they basically just outlined the tree canopy line, figured out the square footage of that being 15,000 square feet. Then you have a larger tree just outside of that. They measured it at 3,200 square feet. So in this case, measuring it was beneficial. And it's a double bonus because it's a specimen tree, and you get a little extra credit when you conserve a specimen tree. So you get 25% extra canopy credit for that. So add 800 for the 25%. And then just below the improved area, they have a tree that is a very wide maturing tree. They measured it at 750 square feet, but they can go ahead and give it to 1,600 square feet since it's a very wide mature tree. So down at the bottom, next to the road, they planted 4 new trees, and those were very wide canopy trees as well, so 1,600 square feet each. So our canopy is 15,000 plus the 3,200 plus the 800 bonus we got when we saved the specimen tree, plus the 1,600 for the tree in front of the improvement, and 6,400 for the 4 trees planted by the road. You add that together, you got 27,000 square feet, divided by the size of the lot, which is 43,560 feet, multiplied by 100, they have a canopy coverage of 62%.
Sandra,
I know that was a lot of math.
we have a question from Zoom.
Okay.
So if you're at a breaking point or stopping point, or you want to wait till the end.
Well, I was going to wait till the end.
Okay, that's fine.
But does anybody have questions about canopy coverage?
Originally, there were zones next to improvements that get credit if there was canopy in those. Is that been discarded? Or?
Yeah, remember we removed the improvement area. We removed the improvement area.
Okay.
So you come up with 62% canopy on that background.
Mm-hmm.
What was required?
Well, for AG1 at 1 acre, 57%. Yep. Any other questions?
So are you allowed to take that excess over 57 and apply to any other lots throughout the subdivision? Say a lot was come up shy?
No. We do not transfer canopy in that case. I mean, if you really get into the ordinance, there is tree banking where you can plant on another site to give you credit. So that can be an alternative compliance option. But you have to have an agreement between the two owners, and then it's all kind of worked out privately, and then you would give us the information about it. But okay, we got one in the back, and then I'll get you.
Are there allowable deductions if they're easement property?
No. No. We look at the entire property. You're talking about as far as counting your square footage and stuff, yeah. So we usually, it's based on the square footage of the entire lot. It doesn't exclude easement or anything like that.
Were there any trees over 16 inches underneath the new house? Do you recognize what the side had before we cleared it?
Were there any trees?
Your example,
Right.
the example assumed there was only a forested area and one tree in front, perfect building site.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kept it simple for the example, but yeah, there could have been trees that they cleared.
We need to recognize trees.
Well, you would show them as being removed, but they wouldn't necessarily be in your canopy calculations when you're figuring out what your canopy coverage is, because you're removing them, so you're not going to be getting any credit for them. But you would typically show them on your plan and just show them with X's as being removed. If they were any specimen trees, then you would need to identify it, because you may have to do recompense if they were true specimen trees.
In addition to getting to the December.
No, what you plant for specimen trees can count towards your canopy coverage. So yeah, maybe those 4 trees at the bottom were planted because they removed 30-inch oak, something in the middle of the property. And that was the recompense.
So there's a separate calculation if there's a specimen tree involved. You can't just go by the 1,600 square foot canopy area.
A separate calculation for what? For your
There's a
canopy
separate
coverage?
recompense if there happens to be a specimen
Right.
on that lot.
Yeah, we'll kind of get into that more when I get to the specimen tree section. But yeah, there is a different recompense requirements for specimen trees, but anything you plant for recompense for specimen trees can count towards your canopy coverage. Okay, so that is actually specimen trees that makes a topic. So we'll get into that. So here is the definition of specimen tree. The sizes for specimen trees change slightly. So now it's any healthy tree that meets the following size criteria. It's going to be 24 inches or greater for hardwoods in the large or medium height class. So again, that's talking like your oaks, your hickories, things like that. 27 inches DBH or greater for pine species, sweet gums, and tulip poplars. Since these are all kind of our fast-growing species, the size criteria is a little larger. 8 inches DBH or greater for your small canopy height class trees. These are going to be your dogwoods, your redbuds, things like that. Heritage tree. So a heritage tree is a little complicated. So a heritage tree is a healthy tree documented as a state or county champion, greater than 75 years old, part of community heritage, a landmark or historic tree, as designated by the Georgia Forest Council, or documented historical significance. So heritage trees are a little different in that first, the owner has to nominate them as a heritage tree, and then second, it has to be approved by City Council. So at this point, we do not have any heritage trees in Milton, but if you find one, you want to nominate one, then let me know later. So specimen trees, here we talk about the extra credit. So if you conserve a specimen tree on your site, you can get 25% canopy cover credit. So say you have keep my math simple because I'm going to do this in my head. So say you had a tree that's 1,000 square feet, you would get 1,250 square feet credit for that. On the back side, if you remove that tree, your recompense is 150% of the canopy that was removed.
Can you substitute the standard calculation on 48-inch water
only if it brings you below the minimum canopy cover. Okay, so then with heritage trees, you get a little more credit. You can get 40% canopy coverage credit if you conserve a heritage tree. And the penalty for removing it's going to be a little steeper too. It's 200% replacement of the canopy removed, plus you'll have to pay into the tree canopy fund at a rate of $31.25 per 100 square feet of canopy removed. So, like I said, right now we don't have any heritage trees, so I don't think anybody will run into this. I'm sorry, before I move on, did anybody have questions about specimen heritage trees?
Oddball situation on the lot, the only buildable area was group of specimen fruit. And the removal, when you did the map, the recompense for that lot would exceed 57%, which you have to, within the recompense number, be completely based upon the recompense of specimen fruit replacement, or would it be capped at 57%?
It would be the recompense of the specimen tree, so it would be the 150%.
So if you remove whatever, there were 3 done, and you ended up with a number of 69%, I mean, when you did the math.
Right.
Then that is what you would be required. Okay. If that made a lot unknowable, what is the process to, is it a variance before the zoning appeals, or is it for the community development director, what's the process?
So it would be an administrative variance. So we have an administrative variance option in the tree ordinance. And an administrative variance is when you just apply to the community development director. So you would basically provide a letter and documentation to the community development director why you want an administrative variance. And it would be up to them to review it. Then after that, you would follow any appeal process.
What you're going to run into occasionally is the only usable suitable soils for a septic system just so happens to be where the 2 specimen fruits. There's no, it's either an unbuilt lot or you use that fruit.
Right. So you would have an option of doing an administrative variance. Any other specimen or heritage tree questions? Okay, then we'll move on to structural root plate. Like I said, this is new. This is something that wasn't in the previous ordinance. But I thought it was important because the structural root plate is what we consider the area of rapid taper in the root zone. And this is basically what's holding the tree up. So whenever you get into the structural root plate of a tree, you do make it more susceptible to falling over and windrow. So structural root plate is defined as the ground and soil area to a depth of 30 inches with a radius extending out from the trunk 0.5 feet for every inch of diameter of breast height. So that's how you would calculate where your structural root plate is. And like I said before, we kind of touched on this. Any tree with encroachment into the structural root plate is not considered a conserved tree and cannot count as canopy cover credit. It doesn't mean you have to remove it. It just means we don't acknowledge it as a healthy bigger tree. Anybody have questions about structural root plate? And like I said, this is different from the critical root zone. The critical root zone is the 1.5 feet radius per inch diameter. This is 0.5 feet per inch diameter. All right, so we'll move on to, I just kind of wanted to touch briefly about this. A lot of this stuff, the required tree location, is covered in the zoning ordinance. A lot of these are requirements for the zoning ordinance. So a lot of information on this stuff is going to be found in the zoning ordinance. But the tree ordinance does kind of touch base on it as well, and will kind of give you some guidelines of how to plant in these areas when they are required. So if you've worked in Milton at all, you've heard rural view shed thrown out there, maybe. So the rural view shed is usually something required for major subdivisions in the zoning ordinance. And the rural view shed is basically 60 feet off the road frontage. That's an area that they want to keep a rural look to and kind of want to keep it natural and keep it planted and looking nice when it's sparsely vegetated. So the tree ordinance takes it a step further because rural view shed is not required on individual residential lots and minor subdivisions, like subdivisions of 3 lots or less. So we do try to encourage you to treat it as a rural view shed, even though it's not required. And you get 20% additional square feet canopy cover bonus for conserving trees within that rural view shed area.
What about planting? Do you get equal if you plant in that?
Well, it says trees conserved within the first 60 feet, but I think you could get a bonus for planting trees too. So that's rural view shed. Like I said, I'm trying to keep this kind of minimal because most of this is covered in the zoning ordinance. But you're also going to find that you have road frontage requirements at times. So whenever you're doing a new development, such as a subdivision where you're putting in roads, you're building new roads, you are going to have street tree requirements. So they may be met with conserved or planted trees. But I mean, most of the time when you're building a street though, you pretty much have to clear the right of way. So not many people are going to be able to do it with conserved trees, but so you will have planted trees, and there's spacing guidelines in the tree conservation manual, depending on what trees. We encourage the very wide or wide canopy trees where possible. I know from time to time you have to deal with overhead utilities and underground utilities, and sometimes that makes it hard on what you can and can't plant along the road frontage.
You have those required tree plantings on the street, and then you go back to that lot to build a house, and those trees count as your percentage.
Yep. Yep. Any trees planted along the road would count as your canopy cover.
That's screening about trees, like if you have a lot next to a pond or something, plant a screen, and that they apply.
Yeah, as long as it's on the tree species list, you get credit. There are some trees that are on the do not plant list, such as Leyland cypress, and I know that's a popular screening thing, so you wouldn't get credit if you planted Leyland cypress trees, but you would if you planted cryptomeria or arborvitae, or hollies, or most other screening trees. So there's a few things that are on the do not plant list. There are things that just have issues, problems with diseases or structural issues like the grass repair. But I mean, I think you'll be able to find plenty of stuff on the tree species list that you can use and get credit for. We're not limited to the tree species list. If you know of a tree you want to plant that's not on the tree species list, just let me know, tell me what it is, and I'll tell you what kind of credit you can get for it. So also, if you're dealing with a commercial site or anything where you have parking lots, you are going to have tree requirements for parking lots, which is pretty standard with the tree ordinances. So, like I said, these are also in the zoning ordinance as well. But for most people, you're going to have a minimum of a very wide or wide canopy tree for every 6 spaces. So basically, every 5 spaces, you'll have to have a tree island with a tree. And there's going to be requirements of soil volume and width of that island in the zoning ordinance and the tree conservation manual. Sometimes landscape strips are required for zoning, so you just need to be aware of those. Make sure you always look it up. Sometimes the zoning will kind of outline what the requirements are within the planting strip. If there are no specific requirements, then you refer to the tree ordinance, where there are some guidelines set up based on width of the landscape. And occasionally, yes. Oh, when it's just 2 parking spaces? No, that's not considered a parking lot. It's just parking for your milking. But I see what you're saying, that's a good question. So sometimes you'll run into, we don't have a lot of these, but from time to time there are some buffers that are required for zoning. Buffers are intended to be visual and noise barrier, like when you have a high density abutting a lower density use or something like that. The idea is that they remain undisturbed, but we do want them planted where it's sparsely vegetated. So sometimes you may have to do some supplemental planting with buffer. And this is just a zoning buffer. This does not be confused with the stream buffer. And there are minimum number of rows based on the width of the buffer, stuff like that. So that's pretty much what I have for required tree locations. Does anybody have questions about those?
Okay. So Milton requires in a subdivision that a detention pond be, on dedicated lot. And those lots are designed to be minimally sized around the detention pond. So are they subject to the 57% canopy rule? It's not a lot of record. It's just a parcel of land owned by the HOA. And they are designed specifically to be no larger than what is required for the detention pond. It has a planted buffer, but it's typically bushes and shrubs for aesthetics.
Right.
They're not going to qualify for 57.
Right. No, I mean,
I can try to answer that.
okay, go for it.
The detention area would need to be covered in the overall design of the subdivision, meeting that requirement. But the individual lot, you make a good point, that doesn't seem feasible to do that. If it's not set up in the code that way, we'll revise it and update it. But that detention lot itself shouldn't fall under the categories of this.
It's not a lot of,
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's not built.
No,
It doesn't need any zoning ordinances or any.
But it should be the overall design of the subdivision.
Right.
Make that coverage calculation, yes. But individual lot, I don't think that's feasible. Good point.
Right, and typically that's kind of how it's been handled in the past, because when you review that, that's usually under the land disturbance permit for the entire subdivision. Nobody comes in for a permit just for that one lot to build a detention pond. It's usually done during the LDC phase, and that's where we take a look at it. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I'll open it up to questions. Now we'll start with our Zoom questions first, because people have been waiting patiently.
First one is, are there any specifics regarding native trees required under the ordinance, i.e. a certain percentage of the trees making up the canopy coverage must be native to our region?
Right, yeah, no, we do not have any specific requirement in the ordinance for native trees or percentage of native trees. When you do get into recompense or buffer requirements, there are areas that list out species diversity, and you can't have more than a certain percentage of one specific species.
Yes. Planted trees, calculation canopy at installation or maturity.
Okay, so that's what we talked about earlier when we talked about canopy coverage credit. So when you're planting a tree, you use the standard canopy cover credit. Let me go back to that real quick. So you would use the standard tree canopy cover credit for a planted tree. So it would be based on the species of tree being planted, how much canopy coverage credit you get. A very wide canopy tree such as an oak is going to get the 1,600 square feet credit, because that's based on the future tree canopy at maturity. So that's what you get for planted trees.
And I just have a late breaking question. Who was the consultant that assisted with the ordinance discussion?
Oh, that was Connie Head, who is now retired, I hear, but she was the consultant that worked on that.
That's all the questions I have on Zoom at this time.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from our audience?
Replanting
Uh-huh.
and canopy calculations. So, you're planting a big rock, 1,600 foot. So, you take that radius and you get additional, or you get full credit if you plant a grouping of trees with overlapping. So if I planted 2 oaks and a couple of maples or mid-story, and then 3 or 4 redbuds, dogwoods in a, so I wanted this quarter of the lot, I wanted to create more of a forest situation or a more natural woodland than planting trees, basically soldier trees every 40 feet apart.
Yeah, clumping is permitted. Yeah, we will take a look at it though, just to make sure the spacing is going to give them adequate room to grow. But yeah, you can do clumping and you would get the full credit as long as they have adequate spacing to meet that.
Yeah, not 2 feet apart.
Right, right.
You're planting a tree that you're basing the future growth of 1,600 foot canopy, like, something like that. Is there a minimum caliber tree you have to plant?
Yes, good question. So the minimum planting requirement is 2 inches caliper for most trees, like on your site. When you are doing parking lot trees and street tree requirements, that is a 3-inch minimum caliper at the time of planting. It's 2 inches. Yeah, pretty much 2 inches for everything except parking lot and street trees. Yes.
I'm trying to figure this out. Let's just take a 1 acre lot. And let's just say you're going to have to clear the whole lot. Everything, if you buy about 400 feet deep, whatever, and there's one trees that exist or in the local area where you're going to grade the lot. Did you say earlier there are trees that exist and you got to maintain 25%?
10%. So yeah, 10% of what you're required minimum canopy cover should come from existing trees. You run into a situation like that where they're all in the middle of the line or on the edge trees, but that would be something that you could do an administrative variance.
And I'm looking at the map, to the right, 40 trees there. I have to replant the entire lot, 57% of an acre. 40 trees,
It's like 16.
60.
43, 560 times 0.57 equals the number, and you divide that by 1,600, and I think it comes up like 15.2%.
Yeah, and it's going to depend on what trees you plant too. I mean, if you're planting all very wide canopy trees, you're going to get the 1,600 per tree. If you throw in some smaller trees like red maples and dogwoods, so it would all just depend on what type of tree you're planting back.
So if it's 16 trees, let's say one third of your lot is either a lake or golf course or something that's not able to plant upon. You have 16 trees on whatever land you have available.
Well, I mean, if you find you can't do it, so there is alternative compliance options, which is the tree bank, like I mentioned earlier. So tree bank right now, we currently don't have any properties listed as a tree bank, but anybody can register as a tree bank. And if they register as a tree bank, what they are allowing is for somebody to come and plant their recompense trees on their lot. Like I said, right now we don't have anybody signed up as a tree bank. So if you wanted to use that option, you would have to find somebody willing to let you plant on their lot where they have available space. Another alternative compliance option is paying into the tree fund for part of your recompense. So, but you can only do 1/3 of that. So 1/3 can be paid into the tree fund. 2/3 of the recompense canopy we're going to want planted on the site. And with the tree banking as well, you're only allowed to tree bank 50% of your required canopy. So you couldn't take all your required recompense and put it on somebody else's property. You would have to split it at least half and half. You can't take all your recompense requirement and put it in the tree fund. You can only do 1/3 and plant 2/3. Yes.
We was working with screening issues, you're more limited with evergreen trees. Don't have a good list. Can you tell me if it's a native lifetime acceptable?
Yes. Yes, I believe so. I don't remember how much credit you get for it. It may be 900 square feet. I believe it's on the list.
If you have a AG1 lot, acre, a pasture, where there's less line, you don't have to go up to 57%, correct?
Correct.
So
When you buy the
nothing
lot,
except for possibly some street trees or something.
right. I mean, if you buy a lot, if it's an individual lot and it's not part of a new development, then yeah, if it starts off with 0 trees, then you would have, since you're not doing any tree removal, you would have no recompense.
If you have multiple lots, you have something, you have two lots, and, say, 5 of them heavy wooded and 5 of them pasture, and you don't have a space on your wooded lots to do the recompense for that particular lot, can you do it on another lot? In the same lot?
Yeah, if you needed to, I mean, that would be like tree banking. So you would just need to set it up as a tree bank, and then you could do half of your recompense on that.
Are there guidelines for the treatment? Like, you have to set up a perpetual easement, or is there guidelines in it?
Now, there's not really guidelines to it. I mean, it does ask that you have, at least 8,000 square feet available for planting. But other than that, I don't think there's many guidelines. And as far as if you are using a tree bank to plant your recompense, it's up to you to work out an agreement with the owner of the tree bank as to what you're planting, how you're planting it, and then easement access, all that. So that would be worked out privately. That would be like just a private matter between the two parties.
But if you own both pieces of property, you don't have to come up and sign up to the owner or whatever, like you said, if you're the owner of both pieces of property.
That would definitely make it easier, wouldn't it?
Well, I'm just saying, you don't have to.
I mean, you would just have to give a statement or something, maybe just saying that I own both these lots. I'm using this one as a tree bank. Sure. So, I mean, do you have a specific question about it, or?
Yes, is it, I can put a very caliber and that,
Right. Yeah, the depth of so, like, you could trench under the tree. If you can trench below that 30 inches, then we wouldn't consider that damage to the structural root plate. But if you're going within any 30 inches, then that's in the structural root plate. If you're digging or trenching or anything like that.
You approach that like septic tank line. Does that discount the entire tree, or is there a portion? What do you do then?
Well, I mean, if you have to go through the structural root plate with your septic line, then, like I said, you wouldn't get credit for that tree. We wouldn't count it as a conserved tree. But that doesn't mean you have to get rid of it. It just can't count towards your canopy coverage.
but if you encroach into that radius, as long as it's above 30 inches depth, it's still considered conserved, correct?
No, as long as it's below, well, as long as you're not, if you can't cut and fill within that 30 inches. Yeah, the boring under. So if you can manage to get below 30 inches without getting into the structural root plate, you'd be okay. Okay, so I do have my contact information here. If you need it, I know that's kind of hard to read. I also have some business cards on the table over here where everybody signed up. So if you have any questions ever, you can call me, email me, let me know. The Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance is available on Unicode. It has not been codified yet, but if you go, when you first open up Unicode, it's going to say ordinances not yet codified, and there's a list of them, and you'll see the tree ordinance, chapter 60, is on there, the Tree Canopy Conservation Ordinance. So it's on Unicode. I don't know how long it's going to take to get them to codify it, but at some point, it will be in the code.
And the manual is included in that.
No, they did not attach the manual to it, but I will get the manual available on our website. I just need to get all the attachments that go with it formatted, so we can have all that. Yes. Yeah, and that will include the tree species list. But in the meantime, I mean, if anybody needs, I do have a PDF of the tree species list. So if anybody wants a copy of that, email me, and I can email it to you, no problem. Okay. So thank you for everybody who came. I hope you got something out of it. And like I said, feel free to call me. Any more questions, Robin? No.